Hello, everyone, and welcome to Out of Nowhere. Well, what can I say about my guest today? He's a fantastic researcher. His name is Tom Whitmore. On today's show, we're going to talk about the Majestic 12. It's one of those things in lifetime, but he's done a lot of research into the subject, and all will be revealed today on this show. Can we please welcome Tom to the show? Hello there.
Thank you, Thank you, Bob. I'm glad to be here. I enjoy
Thank
meeting.
you. How, when you talk about all this research, how did it all start for you then?
I read my first UFO book at age 12, which was Donald Kehoe's Flying Saucers: Serious Business. And I don't know, I have to take into account my gullibility factor, but I immediately became a UFO believer. That was way back in the 1960s. And then in the 1980s, I saw the UFO Cover Up Live program, and I was impressed. And I found a UFO magazine on a magazine stand in San Antonio and read that. So I was pretty much good to go at that point. And I had been studying intelligence and Soviet intelligence, history of Soviet, spying. And I started to put the two together because when I saw the MJ12 documents, the two came together for me. Because when I saw the MJ12 documents, my immediate reaction was, this has something to do with intelligence or intelligence agencies. And so I became active in the field in 1990, and I joined MUFON and got my field investigator's card. And then in a few years, I was asked to serve on the MUFON board. And I served on the MUFON board for over 20 years. So I went through all of the directors of MUFON, Walt Andrus and John Schuessler, and so on and so forth, up to the present time. So I really started digging into MJ12 probably about 10 years ago, but it was all internet research. And then in 2019, I was able to retire. And so I'm able to devote full time to it. So I work 4 hours a day, 6 days a week. I research and write, and I'm working on this book about both the history of the MJ12 controversy and then my own perspectives on the MJ12 subject. So I've written several chapters, and I just keep working at it.
Sounds brilliant. When you talk about MJ12, what historic events in 1947 might have motivated the alleged formation of Majestic 12?
Well, it all depends on if a flying saucer was recovered. And everyone knows the story, the basics about Roswell. And even though we've never received any official confirmation of it, and we've received instead denial from the Pentagon, if it is true that they recovered a UFO and its occupants, one of them possibly being still alive, then it would be logical that the authorities, that being President Truman at the time and the top military and government people, that they would have been freaked out. And they probably would have clamped a very tight lid of secrecy on it. It would have been super secret for obvious reasons. And they would have somehow organized some way to transport and store the material, the UFO and the bodies. And if there was a live alien, then they would have had to accommodate that being somehow. And this is all, very, very dodgy, as the British would probably say.
Yeah.
And whether they actually formed the so-called MJ12 committee or not, they would have had some means of controlling the situation, through the very top levels of government. and through what I would believe, if true, that it would have been under absolute secrecy.
Yeah. Who were the individuals named as members of the MJ12, and what were their real world roles?
Well, the names on the MJ12 committee come from what's called the Eisenhower briefing document that was received by Jamie Shanderay and William Moore, who were research partners. And they received that on a roll of film in December of 1984. And the names on the list were Roscoe Hillenkoetter. He was, at the time on the document, he was designated as MJ1, and he was the first CIA director. He was a rear admiral at the time.
Yeah.
The other names are Vannevar Bush, who is a very well-known electrical engineer, and he had run all kinds of committees in the Office of Scientific Research and Development during World War II, and he was actually over the atomic bomb. He was over a lot of the radar research and proximity fuses and that kind of thing. He would have been a logical person to be on MJ12 because of his experience in running a number of committees at the same time. Another person was James Forrestal, who at the time in 1947 was the Secretary of Defense over the Pentagon. And then Nathan Twining was a top U.S. Air Force general. In 1947, he was on a fast track to become a 4-star and eventually become Chief of Staff of the Air Force, as well as Hoyt Vandenberg, who was already at the very top of the Air Force and either was or became the Air Force Chief of Staff. Another name was Detlef Bronk, who was a biophysicist. And the scientists on the list got in on the ground floor in the 20s when science was really taking off in the US. And they had done groundbreaking work. And Detlef Bronk was one of those people who is considered an expert in biology and biophysics. Another name is Jerome Hunsaker, who was an aeronautical engineer. Sidney Sowers was a rear admiral, and he worked with the National Security Council with Truman. He was very close to Truman, as was Gordon Gray, who was a senior advisor to Truman. Those were both government guys. Robert Montague is on the list, who was an Army general at the Sandia base at the time, and Sandia base worked with the atomic weapons that were available. Lloyd Berkner was an atmospheric physicist. And then the odd name was Donald Menzel, the Harvard astronomer. And it kind of ruffled some feathers when the UFO researchers saw his name because he was such a notorious debunker of UFOs. James Forrestal died after having some mental problems. He either jumped out of a window, or if you want to look at it in terms of conspiracy, was pushed out. And Walter Bedell Smith, the subsequent CIA director, replaced him. So those were the names on the list.
Was there any official response to the MJ12 claims from the US government or military?
Yeah, there really was. The first question that had to be answered was from the FBI. The FBI needed to find out, was any classified information released? And the FBI undertook its own investigation. And as far as I know, they came to the conclusion that the document was phony and that no classified information had been released. Now, they checked with various agencies, and when they checked with AFOSI, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, or with a colonel there at the Pentagon, they wrote, uh, they wrote across the document that it was bogus. So the FBI, they checked into some people that they thought might be connected to it. For example, Richard Doty, but they came to the conclusion that no classified information had been released. And then, secondly, a third document in the MJ12 set, which is known as the Cutler-Twining memo, turned up in the National Archives when Jamie Chandray and William Moore were doing research there. Nobody's really sure how it got in there, but the National Archives at the time conducted their own search and checked with several other government agencies, and they couldn't find any agency or any authority that knew of MJ12 or would admit it. So those are the two things I can think of right off the top of my head that were done immediately to try to ascertain whether
I was going to say about forgeries material. If so, who might have created them and why, do you think?
The best information that I have at the time, and I don't want to be too specific because I want to save my surprises for my book. Okay?
Yeah, I can imagine so. Yeah.
But in more general terms, it came from one of the agencies in the Pentagon. Okay. And now why it was produced and disseminated into the UFO community is a subject of a number of theories, which I'll talk about in my book. I mean, they just, I can go on and on. But at the time in the 80s, there were a number of things going on. The Soviet Union was the intelligence people on the Russian side were just doing everything they could to get every bit of technical information out of the US. And in general, it was fairly easy to do because the United States is basically an open society. And they were able to glean quite a bit of technical information. So it's possible that the MJ12 documents were produced to see if they could somehow track who talked to whom and if any Soviet agents or even Chinese agents turned up.
I was going to say that about the Cold War, government secrecy during the Cold War. Was it anything to do with that perception?
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. was producing stealth aircraft. We were at least saying that we were working on Star Wars, and with the hope and the expectation that would outrun the Soviets so badly that they'd fall far behind, and they would, it's kind of like the space program. They'd have to just accept that they were behind. So, there's a possibility that they're trying to deflect attention away from, these highly classified programs. And there probably were other highly classified programs that weren't the two that I mentioned that they were trying to deflect information from. So I think the Cold War explanations can account for a lot of it, maybe not all of it, because I've learned from my studies and my research and people that I've talked with and my contacts that there was a concerted effort by the Air Force Office of Special Investigations and possibly other agencies to, stir up trouble with the UFO groups and UFO researchers. And they wanted, information about UFO researchers. Now, exactly why, I'm not sure, but I think they had some indication that the CIA had some indication in the 1970s that the Soviet KGB was attempting to approach some UFO researchers. So that could have been part of it.
Yeah. What role might the MJ12 played in the science fiction, and how has that shaped public imagination?
Well, MJ12 was the subject of a TV production fictional TV production called Dark Skies that was, I think, produced or directed by or written by Bryce Zabel. And it's gone into the MJ12 meme is implicated in the Serpo, the whole Serpo story and Serpo documents. And there's just it's part of the conspiracy theory, the conspiracy literature and theory of general conspiracy theory and literature of the UFO cover-up, which for UFO believers has been going on since the inception of the modern UFO era in 1947.
Are there any forensic documents analysis that support or disapprove MJ12 authenticity?
Yeah, there's been work done by Bill Moore. He published a book in 1990 titled The MJ12 Documents, an Analytical Report. And in that book, self-published, 8.5 by 11 size, privately printed, he did his own forensic analysis, which I don't think, in my personal opinion, that didn't amount to much. Phil Klass, who was a notorious UFO debunker in the 80s and 90s, he did a lot of work on the MJ12 documents and came up with a number of objections as to its authenticity. So has Kevin Randall. Stanton Friedman did a whole lot of research in the National Archives, and the main thrust of his investigation was the names on the MJ12 list, and he did wonderful work in researching a lot of the names on the MJ12 list. The problem is none of his research produced a direct linkage between the names and an actual MJ12 committee. Now, later on, other documents started to come into circulation, such as the Psalm 1-01 document, which was is a purported manual for UFO recovery and recovery of alien bodies. And Jan Aldrich, who is a noted UFO historian, he came up with a whole long list of things that he felt were wrong with the Psalm 1-01 document. Now, at the same time, the Psalm 101 document was sent in a very similar manner as the original documents were sent to Bill Moore and Jamie Chandray. The Psalm 101 document was sent to Don Berliner in a very similar way on a roll of film. And Don Berliner wasn't interested in it. He sent it on to Stanton Friedman. Friedman sent it on to Robert Wood, who was a noted UFO personality. And he and his son, Ryan Wood, they thought they were onto something really secret, really super secret. And they researched that quite a bit. They did a lot of work at the National Archives. They reproduced a huge number of documents out of the National Archives, many of which I have on file out of Bob Wood's kindness. But they didn't find a direct linkage between any of the documents that they got out of the National Archives that would authenticate the MJ12 committee, even though they did quite a bit of research. So the biggest opportunity for further forensic investigation is with the whole mess of documents that Timothy Cooper received in the 1990s. And these are actually hundreds of pages of documents. They're fascinating reading, even though there hasn't been enough work really to really dig into the both the details of the documents and the forensics. Now, we have to realize that you can't really get a true forensic conclusion unless you have the original document. And all that people have to work with now, for the most part, are either photocopies of or photographs of these documents. Okay, so that's the main thrust of it.
Right. Are there whistleblowers today who support or challenge the existence of MJ12?
Well, the ones out there that I know of, like Lou Elizondo and company and others, I haven't. Now, I don't follow the day to day as closely as some people on Twitter do, but I haven't heard them talk about MJ12 much. The most interesting thing is the so-called Wilson Davis document, and that was an interview between Eric Davis and Admiral Thomas Wilson, and Thomas Wilson was quote unquote briefed by Stephen Greer in the Pentagon, and then Wilson went on to investigate. And at the time he was getting this briefing, I think one of his assistants or an aide mentioned that he had heard of MJ12. And then Admiral Wilson went on to investigate further and made contact with a party that was actually doing this back engineering work with one of these aerospace companies. So, but other than that, there's no other mention of MJ12, but the implications are obvious.
Could MJ12 still exist today under a different name or umbrella program?
Well, first we had MJ12, then and maybe associated with Aquarius, and that was another name, and then there was Zodiac. Now this is all on the rumor unconfirmed level, and then then there was Zodiac, and then there's Zenith, and I don't know, I would think they change their name every 3 or 4 years. The thing is, I don't know exactly how they do it in Britain, but in the US, they constantly reorganize departments and committees and things. And committees are formed and dissolved and moved around, and they get different people doing different things, and it's constantly in flux. And I think it's partly because of changing circumstances, and maybe partly because they want to keep the public confused, so that it's very hard to track down any information. But those are now I could give you if I went back and checked my files, I can give you probably at least 10 other names for MJ12. And the thing is that the first question is, does MJ12 exist or did it exist? That's a yes or no question.
Yes.
And the second thing we need to know now, if it existed, did it have anything to do with UFOs or not? Okay. And so, that's something that raises the possibility that there could have been an MJ12, but it didn't have anything to do with UFOs. Maybe it had something to do with continuity of government connected with nuclear war. It could have had something to do with, other classified technology, or had nothing to do with UFOs. But, there still remains the possibility if there was a captured UFO and occupants, that MJ12 or something like it may have been formed. And it's just been kept so secret. And some ridiculous journalists make the allegation that, or the assertion that, the government can't keep secrets. That's absolute nonsense. And I'm sure, Bob, about the Official Secrets Act in Britain.
Oh God, yeah.
you can't just get any information you want out of the government, and they'll keep things classified for I don't know how long is a law in your country.
Yeah, I know. Mason's just this is just a different question completely. This might be a bit off the topic for tonight's conversation, but I'm genuinely curious. Do you think aliens are already here? And if they are, what do you reckon they actually want from us?
Now, this is just my opinion, and I don't have proof. It is my opinion that yes, there are aliens here. Now, where they come from, what their origin is, I don't think we know. There's been a lot of speculation that there may be some groups that live here within the earth, maybe underneath the oceans or underground or even inside mountains, uh, or that orbit the earth in their craft, and that they've been here for a long time, a very long time, tens of thousands of years, maybe even millions of years. That's all the speculation. But there's just simply too many reports and too much activity, too many abduction reports to just dismiss the idea that the aliens are here. Now, if they are, it's too complex of a question to answer what they want from us, because if there are aliens here, there are at least several groups. Now, Richard Doty claims that he knew of five. He had been briefed on 5 different alien types, and I think depending on how far on a limb you want to go out, I think there have been a number of others mentioned. But we have the little gray guys, and we have the long-nosed grays and the tall grays, and these are alien types that have been mentioned. And then there have been the human types, the Nordics with long hair, long blonde hair, and the reptilian types, the mantis, insectoid kind, and so on and so forth. So, with all of these possibilities and all these groups, it's just too complicated to say, well, what do they want from us? It could be that we're projecting our own thinking and needs and expectation on them, and what they want has absolutely nothing to do with anything we can think of.
True, yeah. I think Jamie Sanders and William Moore, 2 figures, claim to have received documents.
Yeah, like I've been saying, William Moore and Jamie Chandray, they received a roll of film. It showed up at Jamie Chandray's house. It was postmarked Albuquerque, New Mexico, and it had 3 envelopes in it: a larger size envelope, and then another envelope, and then inside that was a third envelope that the roll of film was in. It was a roll of 35 millimeter film. They had it developed, and then the 2 original MJ12 documents showed up, which were what we now know as the Eisenhower briefing document and the Truman Forrestal memo. Now, the Eisenhower briefing document was a purported document to brief President-elect Eisenhower before he went into office about the captured UFO situation. And then the second document in the roll of film was the what is called the Truman Forrestal memo, in which President Truman purportedly authorized the formation of MJ12. He authorized James Forrestal, the Secretary of Defense at the time, to go ahead with the MJ12 committee. Now, a third document turned up in the National Archives, like I mentioned, which is known as the Cutler-Twining memo. I've been to the Cutler-Twining. I've been to the National Archives, and I've held it in my hand. It appears to be a carbon copy, but it's unsigned, and there are certain controversies surrounding that. But I've also had conversations with the archivist, the archival supervisor who was involved looking into that at the time. So that was the original set of documents.
How has the Freedom of Information Act affected access for potential MJ12 related materials then?
Well, all kinds of Freedom of Information Act requests have been filed. Now, there are two problems. Well, there's one problem. The information is either classified or not. Now, if it's classified, the government has a choice. They can either say that it's classified and they can't release or won't release it, or they can declassify it. Okay. Now, for example, the Cutler-Twining memorandum, which is in the National Archives, it's the only purported MJ12 document that's in the National Archives. It's not considered classified. Okay. They don't know how it got in there. Any other documents that are classified are not going to be released. Now, I myself, just last month or within the last 2 months, I filed a Freedom of Information Act request with very specific names of particular projects that are connected with certain controversies about a certain government agency's activities during the 1980s. And I sent in this FOIA request, and the answer that I got is that we can neither confirm nor deny that project existed. But then they also said that the information was properly classified. So take a wild guess whether it existed or not, but they wouldn't release any information about it.
That's about right, isn't it?
Yeah.
What about?
It may be even harder to get information out of the British government. I don't know.
Oh, I'm sure it is. What about Black Vault created by John Greenwood World? He's talked about the MJ documents before. Don't know if you knew anything about that.
Well, he's properly skeptical. Greenwood does not. He has a tendency to not accept anything as authentic unless it's been properly released by the government. And for example, he was able to get the state of New Mexico to release Richard Doty's file, or what they would release of it, of his record as being a New Mexico state policeman. Okay. He considers that properly released information that you can rely on. And the conservative UFO researchers like Barry Greenwood and Michael Swords and Jan Aldrich and those, they just don't accept anything that hasn't been properly released by the government. And now Greenwald has also been, I think, misguidedly skeptical about the Wilson Davis document. Now, the Wilson Davis document is not a government document. It was actually in the possession of now deceased astronaut Edgar Mitchell, and a fan of his who was close to him as a friend was able to get a hold of Mitchell's personal files. And that individual was actually an Australian who had the documents or took the documents back to Australia with him. And then another Australian researcher was able to go through the files, and he retrieved the Wilson Davis document. And then he, in turn, tried to get that document to Grant Cameron, and Grant Cameron didn't really handle it right, but at some point it ended up on the internet, and then it became it went into the public domain. But it was never meant to be public. It was the Wilson Davis conversation was recorded in a report that Eric Davis sent to Robert Bigelow and apparently to other members of NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Science, and it was never meant to be public. In fact, if you read the Wilson Davis document, that uh, Admiral Wilson says, if this ever becomes public, I'll deny it, which he has done. So, Greenwald he's mentioned some, I think, rather absurd explanations, and some other people have, for the Wilson Davis document. But I happen to know that it is authentic. It's true.
Where can the original MJ12 documents be found or viewed today?
Okay, there's a great website that Ryan Wood has created. It's called majesticdocuments.com. That's majesticdocuments.com. And you can see just about all of the documents that are worth looking at. It has, the original MJ12s, and it has most of, or a lot of, the Timothy Cooper documents. The Woods had done a lot of research on the Psalm 101 manual and other things. So you just go on Majestic, and there's other information in there. The Woods have a timeline of what documents were received when, by whom, and so on and so forth. And I highly recommend it for anyone that's interested in MJ12 to go to majesticdocuments.com.
Where do you think we're going to, in the future, find out more about MJ12?
Well, certain information does dribble out. And again, I don't want to give away all my secrets, even though most of my information is open source. But, and if you know where to look, you can find, what I'm talking about. But sometimes it comes to the matter of people dying. And then once they die, maybe someone will say something about it. Okay. And then other people won't refuse to discuss it, and they won't reveal anything. But occasionally somebody dies, and then whoever knows something about it feels like they, it's not improper, at least, to make some remarks about it. And also, certain people who have really done a lot of investigating in this had or have their own files, and when they become deceased, somebody gets a hold of them. Either the children throw away the files, or another UFO researcher gets a hold of them and archives them. For example, Richard Doty has told me that he has been or is in the process of getting Robert Collins files. And Robert Collins had done all this work and wrote this book called Exempt from Disclosure. But and then there are other, now this is more what I call conventional UFO files, but there are other archives out there. For example, David Marler in Albuquerque, New Mexico, has his archive, the National UFO archive there in Albuquerque, and it's really quite a wonderful thing. I visited Dave in Albuquerque at his home, but he was able to get with a school system there, and they donated a couple of buildings that he's been able to use, to store all this stuff in a proper way that people can go in and do research. And there are other there's a lot of stuff on the internet. And there are other archives which I won't go into here.
Have you ever been warned off about investigating the MJ12?
I wish I had. That would make me think I'm on the right track. No, I haven't. I'm just little old Tom Whitmore in San Antonio, Texas, sitting in this office, 4 hours a day, 6 days a week.
What do you think about the Men in Black then? Who are they?
I think it's now this is just my personal opinion, but there are a lot of legends and rumors and mythology, myths, and people hear certain stories or people want to believe certain things and they exaggerate or they project their own expectations into certain events. Now, there are what I consider real men in black, and those are government representatives who are protecting the nation's state secrets. And if you get too close to true classified information, say about a stealth aircraft or some other project, you might get a visit from somebody, either from the Defense Investigative Service or AFOSI or the FBI, because they don't want that information one out into the public, and they don't want it getting into foreign hands like the Chinese or the Russians or whomever. So, but I'm talking about what are most likely conventional classified projects, aircraft or electronics or radar or something, that they're trying to protect. And they haven't visited me. I don't know if they wear blue suits or black suits.
Well, I had a visit.
I have a plug in their ear.
I had a visit in 2017.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was really scared me, and a lot of people know about it. Philip Mantle knows about what happened, and it scared me. You don't think anybody's going to turn up your door like that. And I was dog sitting at the time for a good friend of mine who had been in the Air Force in America for quite a number of years. And he'd gone on a world cruise and said, "Do me a favor, Bob, look after me dog. I'll be away for about 3 months," something like that. And then, I'd seen a few things. I'd been followed a few. Well, my imagination runs away with me sometimes. I think, was that car there yesterday in a different place? But it seemed to be following me everywhere I went. And then the week before it happened, at the knock at the door, saw somebody at the black window through some patio doors, and I thought, what was that? Looked a bit strange with a strange hat on. And I sent the dog out, and then I went out after, and he had 7-foot fencing all the way around, so nobody could get in. In the morning, I went round and checked for footprints, couldn't see any footprints at all. And that were a week before it all happened, this. And then on the night when they turned up at the door, and I opened it, I thought, who the hell are you? And then your mind just goes blank.
What did the person look like? How was the
typical Men in Black? Typical Men in Black, black suits, black glasses on, quite tightly. The skin looked a bit pale to me, as though it wasn't real skin. And they said, "What you've seen, you shouldn't have seen, and we've been watching you for quite a while." And one of them just leaned over and said to me, "We are watching you." They turned around, both of them, disappeared down the driveway and vanished. So I ran upstairs and I ran to the front bedroom, so it looks over the street. It's it's not a street, it's a bloody road. Goes quite a long way. And I looked out and I couldn't see nobody. Absolutely. It looked as though they just vanished in thin air. And it frightened me, and I went back inside, sat down, and I thought, was that real? Were they real people, them two? Anyway, I couldn't hardly sleep. I went to bed. And then when I got up in the morning, all the power in the house had gone off for some unknown reason. Don't know if it's coincidence or not. Tried all the lights. It was pitch bloody black. I slept. I'd managed to go to sleep eventually and overslept. And that's not me. Never, ever do that. And his box was in the cellar. He got a wine cellar. So I climbed down these bloody stairs. It's quite steep, like, looked at all these switches. I thought, there's not been switched off. So I went up and down, up and down, up and down, and no lights appeared and went on again. I went back upstairs and I thought, that's weird. Why was the lights off when they looked on? Very strange procedure. Anyway, when I got dressed, I went to walk the dog and I do some volunteer work. So I walked back into town. When I got into town, I rang Paul up. I said, Paul, I've something to tell you. Will you come round shop? And he walked in and said, there's something wrong, isn't there? I can tell, because usually you always say hello to everybody. Anyway, I told him the story. So he got in his car and went up to this road and knocked on everybody's door to see if anybody had got any videos working. And nobody had any on. That's the sign of a good researcher as well, doing my job and gone round and knocked on everybody's door and asked anybody, was you out at so-and-so at 8 o'clock in the night? Did you see anybody? No, nobody saw no. So it just makes you wonder who is watching you. And that's not the first time something's happened similar to that. Up at Benton, me and Paul have been to Benton quite a few times. And somebody told us up there, but people are watching you. We came back one night from the seafront because it's quite a fair walk. When we got back, I got in car and he said, I think you've got your thing in car. And then when I looked, bloody window was open. Nobody can get into Paul's car at all. And the alarms would have gone off. Anyway, I said, Paul, your window's down. I said, I know for a fact it's -4 out there. We wouldn't have left the window down anyway. Anyway, we're driving off. And at the back of his chair, the window was down in that. But no alarms had gone off. Just makes you wonder how people can get into your car without the alarms going off. And who is watching you?
Have you ever come across something that the government could consider to be sensitive?
Oh, yeah, Benton. Yeah, I would say Benton. There's an old RAF base, and it was all underground up there during the Cold War. That was shut down quite a few years ago, but there's stuff up there what could blow your mind away. We've seen UFOs in the sky. We've seen a UFO in the sea, below the sea. The sheep being killed up there. There's all sorts been happening since. A lot of it's been from 2017 to the present day, but this could have been happening thousands of years ago. It's just another hotspot around the world. Now, people are talking about it now, about Benton. It's been discussed on TV quite a few times. What's the significance with Benton? Why is it a hotbed of activity? Sometimes you can go up there for 6 months, see nothing, and also if you're not prepared with your cameras, something will appear.
Did it have anything to do with nuclear?
Well, it was I forget what they call it now, anti-radar thing during the war years. When intelligence people were up there as well. Just one of those places, but the activity was up there, and somebody who worked up there, he said his job on the night time when he went out was to take photos of unusual objects in the sky. Well, them places. And it's still happening today, Tom.
There's been credible research that of a pattern of UFO activity around nuclear, either bases that hold nuclear weapons, or nuclear facilities like Oak Ridge or places like that.
Like
And,
Rendlesham.
yeah. And, it's not just some of the obvious ones you hear about these days, but there is, like one researcher with SCU, the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, researchers there have done a lot of, historical research and have produced quite a lot of correlation between UFO activity and nuclear related locations. And also, there's a wonderful book called UFOs and the Government by Michael Swords and company. And there are places like in Los Alamos in the early years of the UFO, modern UFO era. There was so much activity around there that the scientists had formed a group, a club, a watch club. They were going out and looking for UFOs. So, these things happen. Now, in that particular location, I'm not familiar with it, but if there are UFOs around there or aliens or whomever, there's something there that they're interested in.
And the best part about it, now it's a bird sanctuary up there as well. But all the farmers who have fields up there don't like people like us being up there, because there's their fields go so far, and then there's a public right of way path where we walk, and there's bird platforms where we can stand there and look in the sky. So we've always got somewhere, a nice place to be, where you can position yourself to look out to sky or look in the, and then sometimes in the fields, I think it was 2018, I was looking at, because it's a bird sanctuary. I said to Paul, "What's that bird up there?" He went, "Don't know." And I looked over and I thought, there's a square light in a field. And I thought, well, there's no post there. So I looked over and he went, I said to Paul, that I put my torch on it, his daughter put the torch on it, and it just fell to the ground and disappeared. So we walked over to it. I said, "There, Paul." He went, "There's no post here at all." And that's not the first time we've seen blue lights appear in the field.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen red, like an umbrella type thing, come up and go out like an umbrella at top of a tree and then vanish. Mm-hmm. So there's some energy or some sort coming from the ground up there. It just seems to disappear. Gone.
Yeah.
But yeah, what is it? Does it happen all the time? No. Does it happen now and then? Yes.
Have you ever seen a UFO, Bob?
Yeah, we have up there. Yeah. Seen quite a few in the sky coming across. We think this is us, like, but there's an underwater base in the North Sea. Mm-hmm. Whereabouts where we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's become a topic of discussion these days about underwater bases.
Yeah, where Flamborough Head is, right over there. Because there's lots over the years. Paul's done the research into it, and there's numerous planes disappeared over Flamborough Head, jets.
Well, the weather's pretty rough up there.
Yeah, but they just disappeared, gone, crashed, and it just makes you wonder why they're crashing. We've seen these orange lights what appear in the sky quite often. Sometimes you can get 2 in, then it's 3, 7, and then we've had 13 in different spells, but in different places. So we know they're not lights what go. Forget what they call them now. Anyway, these are objects in the sky what appear, orange lights. And some nights you can see 13 in a 20-minute spell appear. And then you'll all of a sudden you hear the jets coming after them. But and then they vanish.
Hmm.
You know, so the jets must see them while they're up there. That's why
Yeah.
they've been brought out, and they'll have come from Lincoln. That's south of Briglington. It's in Lincolnshire. There's an RAF base down there, so they can come over. They can be in there in 20 minutes, I presume. Won't take them long to get there.
Well, here's the deal, though. Let's say hypothetically, there's a UFO. It comes up on radar from some base. They scramble an airplane or airplanes, and the airplane disappears. Okay, now the pilot may be married, may have a family, may have children. The military and the government, they have to have a cover story. I mean, if they, if it really was a true UFO event and the plane was captured or disappeared, the government would have to have a cover story. So you're not going to get the truth,
True.
about the situation. They're going to say there was a equipment failure or the pilot became disoriented and crashed into the ocean. I can think of several cover stories myself. I'm not even in that business. So that's the kind of thing that we're dealing with now. I'm aware of a story, and I have a documented reference of a military guy that told a story that when he was in Japan, he was doing weather. He happened to be in a room at the time that bogies showed up on the radar at the base. They scrambled an aircraft up there, and they were special aircraft with special instrumentation just for that purpose, because there was so much UFO activity in the north of Japan. They scrambled the plane up there, and it disappeared. Okay, so what's the government going to do? There's not going to be a newspaper report of it unless it somehow gets out to the press. But they've got, assuming the pilot has relatives, mother, father, sister, brother, wife, children, they're going to have to come up with some explanation for it. They're not going to tell them it was captured by a UFO. That's for sure.
Definitely. How do you see the future now with the government? Oh, another good question I'm going to ask: who actually runs the country now, the world? What government, or is the association of billionaires who run it?
I think it's a combination of, top government people and the rich, the rich. Now, the rich, I mean, you can go back to the Middle Ages at least, but the rich have always run the world. And kings were notorious about overspending and going into debt, and somebody had to lend them money. And it got to the point in the late 18th and 19th century when the Rothschilds came into play, that one of the Rothschilds said, "Let me control a country's money, and I'll control that country." So it's actually a combination of both. You have politicians at the top of the pyramid. You have government experts and bureaucrats at the top, and you have the very rich. And I think it's a combination of those. Now, whether there's some secret society or not, I don't know about that. But there are some obvious meetings, like the Bilderbergers and the Davos meeting, and and that kind of thing. You may not know who's attending, but it's a well-known fact that there are meetings going on. They're not necessarily nefarious, but they're probably looking toward the future and trying to figure out how to handle whatever situations they've got and what they see coming over the horizon.
When we talk, we haven't got long left. When you're talking about UFOs and all that, they must look at us and think, all they're doing down there is killing themselves.
Yeah. So I don't know. I do follow the news. I follow the headlines pretty closely. And I have my own opinions about some of the darker things that our government has done. I'm well aware of the dark things that the communist countries have done. And, it's it's a mad, mad world out there.
It is a mad, mad world. It's so true that. But where can people find you if they need to get in touch with you with any information or anything?
I have a little website. It's Tom Whitmore Blog. That's all one word. Tom Whitmore Blog.wordpress.com. It's Tom Whitmore Blog.wordpress.com. I have research papers, commentaries, a list of the appearances I've had. This will go on that list, and so on. So go to tomwhitmoreblog.wordpress.com.
So have you got any more books out where people can buy them?
I wish. No, I'm trying to get this book done, and I feel like Sisyphus, the guy that pushes the boulder up the hill and then it comes back down.
Yeah.
I hope to finish it before I die. That's all I can say.
Oh my God. We're going nowhere yet.
I'm not there yet. I got a ways to go.
Oh yeah, of course you have. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been very interesting subject. Loved it.
Yes, Bob, I've really enjoyed talking with you. I wish you the best of luck.
And thank you as well. Yeah, I'd like to write a book about Men in Black. So that'll take me years, I can imagine. So, but I'll get on with it.
Okay.
Keep doing a little bit. Keep writing a little bit.
Okay. Good luck with it.
Yes, thank you again.
Okay. Thank you.
My guest next Wednesday is Peter Robbins. A great friend of mine is Peter. Do you know Peter from New York?
Yeah, and he's the expert on James Forrestal's death.
Oh yeah. He's on next Wednesday, so we'll have a great show with Peter. He's a great guy. I've met him quite a few times in the UK at conferences as well.
Yeah, good for you.
Yes, okay. Thank you again. You take care and have a lovely weekend.
Thank you. I'll keep watching Wimbledon.
Yes, the same here. I will as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Good night and God bless.
God bless you.
Bye
too.
for now.
Goodbye.